The smallest acts of kindness are often witnessed by the eyes that matter most. Snow drifted across the rooftops of Blackthorn Keep like silent feathers carried by the winter wind, softening the stone towers and quieting the bustling streets below. Merchants hurried to cover their stalls before another wave of icy air swept through the market square, while mothers wrapped scarves around laughing children who raced between wagons carrying firewood and fresh produce. Just beyond the crowded marketplace, tucked beside a narrow cobblestone lane where few nobles ever walked, stood a tiny bakery with a weathered wooden sign that simply read Emma's Pies. Warm light spilled through its frosted windows, carrying with it the comforting scent of cinnamon, butter, and freshly baked apples that drifted into the cold afternoon like a promise that even winter could not erase. Inside, Emma Brooks carefully lifted 2 golden apple pies from the oven, brushing a loose strand of chestnut hair behind her ear before placing them on the cooling rack. Her gray apron was dusted with flour, her sleeves rolled neatly above her wrists, and although her bakery was small enough that only 3 customers could comfortably stand inside at once, every corner reflected quiet care. The shelves were polished, the windows clean, and a tiny vase holding dried wildflowers rested near the register. Business had never been easy for an Omega living alone, especially one without family wealth or powerful connections. Yet Emma greeted every customer with the same gentle smile, whether they purchased a whole pie or only a single slice. She believed warm food carried hope farther than words ever could. As evening approached, the last paying customer thanked her and stepped back into the swirling snow. Emma counted the few dollar bills in the wooden drawer before letting out a quiet breath. It would cover flour, butter, and enough apples for another day, but little more. Still, she smiled as she wrapped 2 remaining pies in clean linen cloth instead of putting them away for tomorrow. She had learned long ago that someone was always hungrier than she was. Outside, the wind grew stronger, carrying snowflakes across the nearly empty street. That was when she noticed movement near the edge of the alley beside the bakery. 2 young boys, no older than 8 or 9, stood shivering beneath the shadow of an old oak tree. Their dark winter cloaks were damp with snow, their boots splashed with slush, and although the fabric they wore was far finer than anything found in the neighborhood, both children looked exhausted. One clutched the other's hand as if trying to appear brave despite the cold. Emma pushed open the bakery door without hesitation. "You 2 look frozen," she said softly. "Come inside before this weather gets any worse." The boys exchanged uncertain glances before stepping into the warmth. Their cheeks slowly regained color as the scent of baked apples filled the room. Emma poured steaming cider into 2 mugs and sliced generous portions from one of the fresh pies. The younger boy stared at the plate in disbelief. "Is this really for us?" he asked quietly. Emma nodded with a smile that carried no curiosity, no suspicion, and certainly no expectation of reward. Hot pie always tastes better when it's shared. Neither child mentioned their names, and Emma never asked. She simply watched them eat with grateful eyes while snow continued falling beyond the windows, never imagining that the entire royal palace had already begun searching for 2 missing Wolf Pup Princes whose disappearance had thrown an entire kingdom into silent panic. The following afternoon, the little bell above the bakery door chimed just as Emma Brooks finished arranging fresh apple pies in the front window. The storm had passed during the night, leaving nearly 6 inches of sparkling snow across the streets of Blackthorn Keep. Sunlight reflected from every rooftop, making the entire village appear brighter than it had in weeks. Emma smiled quietly as she swept a few snowflakes from the entrance before returning behind the wooden counter. Business remained slow. Most families were saving every dollar they had for firewood and winter supplies. Yet Emma greeted each visitor with the same warmth she had always offered. An elderly carpenter purchased a single slice of pie. A young mother thanked Emma for adding an extra roll to her order without charging another cent. A delivery boy stopped only long enough to warm his hands near the oven before continuing his route. Emma never expected anyone to notice those small kindnesses. They simply felt like the right thing to do. As the afternoon shadows slowly stretched across the narrow street, the familiar sound of cautious footsteps approached once again. The bakery door opened carefully, and the same 2 boys stepped inside wearing thick wool cloaks that still carried traces of melting snow. Their cheeks were rosy from the cold, Yet this time there was excitement in their bright eyes instead of uncertainty. Emma looked up from kneading dough and smiled immediately. "Welcome back," she said. "I was hoping you both stayed warm." The older boy smiled shyly while the younger one looked directly toward the cooling rack where several golden apple pies rested. Emma laughed softly. "I had a feeling you might like another slice." She invited them to sit beside the fireplace while she poured fresh apple cider into 3 mugs. Steam curled gently into the air as the comforting smell of cinnamon filled the little bakery once again. The younger child eagerly accepted another generous slice, while his older brother politely thanked her before taking the first careful bite. Watching them eat brought Emma a quiet happiness that money never seemed to provide. She noticed the older boy's wool glove had begun to unravel near the wrist. Without making him feel embarrassed, she reached beneath the counter, removed a small sewing kit, and carefully repaired the loose stitching while they enjoyed their pie. "There," she said with a gentle smile. "It should last through the rest of winter." The older boy stared at the repaired glove with quiet amazement before whispering, "No one has ever fixed something for me before." Emma simply shrugged. Everything deserves another chance if it can still be useful. After finishing their pie, the younger boy wandered curiously toward the kitchen where apples rested inside wooden baskets waiting to be peeled. "Can we help?" he asked hopefully. Emma smiled. "Of course. Every good pie begins with clean apples." She showed them how to rinse each apple carefully before placing it into a large wooden bowl. The younger child splashed water onto the table by accident and immediately looked worried, but Emma only laughed, handed him a clean towel, and together they wiped the table dry. Soon all 3 of them were smiling while peeling apples, measuring cinnamon, stirring butter into the filling, and carefully arranging thin slices beneath flaky pie crusts. For the first time in many days, the bakery echoed with children's laughter instead of silence. Outside, several passing neighbors slowed as they noticed the cheerful sounds drifting through the windows. None of them recognized the 2 boys whose faces had already become the center of desperate search efforts throughout the royal palace. Far above the village, inside the towering halls of Blackthorn Keep, worried royal advisors continued studying maps while dozens of trusted guards searched every road leading into the surrounding forests. At the center of the growing concern stood Alpha King Nathan Ashford, whose calm expression concealed the weight of a kingdom. No one had yet discovered that the 2 missing Wolf Pup Princes were spending another peaceful afternoon learning how to bake apple pies beside an Omega who still believed she was simply caring for 2 hungry children who needed warmth more than questions. Morning sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of the great hall inside Blackthorn Keep, yet its warmth failed to ease the growing concern that had settled over every corner of the royal palace. Servants moved quietly through polished stone corridors, speaking in hushed voices as royal advisors gathered around a massive oak table covered with detailed maps of the kingdom. Small wooden markers had already been placed along forest trails, village roads, frozen rivers, and trading routes where trusted guards had searched since dawn. Every report ended with the same troubling conclusion. No one had found the 2 young Wolf Pup Princes. Alpha King Nathan Ashford stood at the head of the table with remarkable composure, his silver eyes carefully studying every marked location without allowing frustration to cloud his judgment. He listened patiently as captains described each search, asking calm, thoughtful questions instead of assigning blame. The princes had disappeared for several hours on previous occasions, always returning safely before sunset, but never had they remained away long enough for the entire kingdom to begin worrying. One senior advisor cleared his throat before speaking carefully. "Your Majesty, perhaps someone has hidden the young princes intentionally." Nathan slowly shook his head. "If that were true, we would have received demands or threats by now. Whoever they are with has not harmed them." The room fell silent as everyone considered his words. Nathan remembered the curious hearts of the 2 boys better than anyone. They loved wandering beyond palace walls, fascinated by ordinary people whose lives differed greatly from their own. They often asked questions about blacksmiths, farmers, bakers, and stable workers. Nathan had always encouraged compassion, yet now he wondered whether their innocent curiosity had carried them farther than anyone expected. Meanwhile, several miles away in the little bakery beside the market square, Emma Brooks carefully removed another fresh pie from the oven while the two boys proudly admired the pastries they had helped prepare. Their crusts were uneven, their apple slices slightly crooked, and one pie leaned noticeably to one side. But Emma smiled as though they had created masterpieces. "Every baker starts somewhere," she said warmly. "The important part is that you made it with care." The younger boy beamed with pride while his older brother quietly asked if they could return again another day. Emma nodded without hesitation. "There will always be room at this table." Before leaving, the older child carefully folded a small linen towel Emma had lent them and placed it neatly on the counter. "Thank you for treating us like family," he whispered so softly that Emma almost did not hear him. Her smile became gentler still. "Everyone deserves to feel welcome somewhere." The boys stepped back into the bright winter afternoon, pulling their cloaks close as they disappeared into the bustling marketplace. Several merchants smiled politely as the children passed, never recognizing the familiar royal features hidden beneath simple hoods. Back at the palace, however, the atmosphere shifted unexpectedly when two royal guards arrived carrying surprising news. A fruit seller near the market had reported seeing two unusually polite boys visiting a small neighborhood bakery on consecutive afternoons. The description was incomplete, but one detail caught Nathan's full attention. The merchant insisted the children always left carrying warm apple pies and smiling as though they had forgotten the rest of the world. Nathan looked toward the frosted palace windows where gentle snow continued drifting across the rooftops below. A faint smile touched his face for the first time that day. "Do not send soldiers," he instructed quietly. "If those children truly feel safe enough to smile, I will go myself." Without another word, the Alpha King fastened his dark winter cloak, stepped into the crisp afternoon air, and began walking toward the quiet corner of the marketplace where the comforting scent of fresh apples and cinnamon floated softly above the snow. The marketplace grew busier as afternoon sunlight shimmered across the snow-covered rooftops, yet Emma Brooks noticed little beyond the steady rhythm of preparing another batch of apple pies. Butter melted gently into the warm filling, while cinnamon and freshly sliced apples filled the bakery with the familiar fragrance that had become a quiet refuge for so many neighbors during the long winter. The little bell above the front door chimed every few minutes as customers stopped in for bread, pastries, or simply a moment beside the comforting warmth of the brick oven. Emma greeted every visitor with the same gentle smile, never treating anyone differently whether they wore patched coats or expensive wool cloaks. Across the market square, however, an unfamiliar figure walked with calm purpose through the crowd. Wrapped in a dark winter cloak trimmed with understated silver embroidery, Alpha King Nathan Ashford attracted almost no attention. His hood remained lowered just enough to hide his identity, while allowing him to observe the people around him naturally. He was not searching for signs of fear or danger. Instead, he watched for laughter. He watched for ordinary happiness. The fruit seller who had spoken with the royal guards pointed quietly toward the small bakery tucked beside the narrow lane. "That is where the boys were," the old merchant whispered. Nathan thanked him with a respectful nod before continuing alone. As he approached, the comforting aroma of baked apples drifted into the cold air exactly as described. Through the frosted front window, he could see a young woman carefully dusting flour from her apron while speaking kindly to an elderly customer. There was nothing remarkable about the scene except how peaceful it felt. Inside the bakery, the familiar sound of the bell announced another visitor. Emma glanced up with her usual welcoming smile. "Good afternoon," she said warmly. "Please come in out of the cold." Nathan stepped inside, quietly removing his gloves as warmth from the oven replaced the sharp winter chill. His eyes moved across the simple room. Fresh pies cooled on wooden racks. Clean shelves held neatly arranged loaves of bread. Dried wildflowers rested inside a small glass vase. Every detail reflected quiet care rather than luxury. Emma noticed that her guest appeared tired despite carrying himself with calm confidence. "You look like you have been walking for quite a while," she said. "Would you like some hot cider?" Nathan smiled politely. "I would appreciate that very much." As Emma poured the steaming cider, the bakery door suddenly opened once again. The two familiar boys hurried inside with snow clinging to their boots, laughing as they brushed white flakes from their cloaks. The younger one immediately spotted Emma and waved enthusiastically. "We came back," he announced with unmistakable excitement. Emma laughed softly. "I can see that. The pies just came out of the oven. Before she could say another word, both boys noticed the quiet stranger standing beside the counter. Their cheerful expressions froze for only a heartbeat before transforming into wide smiles of relief. "Father!" the younger prince exclaimed joyfully. As both children hurried across the room, Emma looked up in surprise as the stranger knelt to embrace the boys with gentle affection. Relief softened every line of Nathan's face as he rested a reassuring hand on each child's shoulder, silently grateful to find them safe, healthy, and smiling. The little bakery became wonderfully quiet. Emma slowly realized she had not simply welcomed two wandering children during the past several days. She had unknowingly opened her doors to the young Wolf Pup Princes themselves. Before astonishment could settle fully into the room, Nathan rose calmly and looked first at the boys, then at Emma. His expression carried gratitude rather than authority as he asked a single gentle question that caused everyone present to fall completely silent. "Tell me," the Alpha King said softly, "who has been taking care of you?" For several quiet seconds, no one spoke. The warmth of the little bakery seemed to wrap around the room, while snow continued drifting gently beyond the frosted windows. The two boys looked at each other before turning toward Emma Brooks with bright, unquestioning smiles. The younger prince answered first. "She did." His small hand pointed happily toward the flour-covered baker behind the counter. "She gave us hot apple pie when we were cold." The older prince nodded. "She never asked who we were. She only wanted to know if we were hungry." Nathan Ashford slowly turned his eyes toward Emma. There was no fear in her expression, only quiet surprise as she finally understood who the children truly were. She quickly lowered her gaze with respectful humility. "Your Majesty, I did not know they belonged to the royal family," she said gently. "I only saw two children standing outside in the snow." Nathan studied her face carefully. During years of ruling the kingdom, he had met countless people eager to gain favor with the crown, yet the young woman before him displayed none of the excitement, calculation, or expectation he had learned to recognize. Instead, she appeared almost worried that she might have unknowingly crossed a royal custom. The younger prince reached for another small piece of apple pie before smiling up at his father. "She taught us how to bake." The older boy added quietly, "She fixed my glove because it was torn." Nathan glanced toward the neatly repaired stitching and noticed how carefully every thread had been sewn. It was a tiny detail, one most people would never notice, yet it revealed the same patience that filled every corner of the little bakery. Emma hesitated before speaking again. "I hope I did not overstep, Your Majesty." They looked tired, and it was very cold outside. Nathan's expression softened. "You offered warmth before asking questions." Emma answered simply, "Sometimes that is what people need most." Her words settled over the room with unexpected weight. The Alpha King slowly looked around the bakery once more. Fresh bread rested beside cooling pies. A basket near the door contained several wrapped loaves with small handwritten notes that read, "For anyone who needs one today." Near the window stood a wooden jar labeled Winter Meals Fund, filled with only a few coins. Beside it rested a notebook listing names of neighbors who would pay when spring arrived. Nathan quietly realized this was not an isolated act of kindness. This was the way Emma lived every day. An elderly woman entered the bakery carrying an empty basket and immediately apologized. "Emma, I cannot pay until next week." Emma smiled warmly before the woman could finish speaking. "Take the bread home while it is still warm. We can worry about the rest later." The grateful customer thanked her and left with tears shining softly in her eyes. Nathan watched the exchange without saying a word. Nothing about it appeared rehearsed. No one knew the Alpha King had been standing there only moments earlier, and Emma had behaved exactly the same way with every person who entered her shop. The younger prince tugged gently on his father's sleeve. "She even let us help make the pies." The older prince smiled proudly. "Mine was crooked, but she said every baker starts somewhere." Nathan found himself smiling despite the worry that had filled the palace only hours before. Looking back at Emma, he finally understood why the princes had returned day after day instead of revealing who they were. Inside this humble bakery, they had not been treated as heirs to a throne. They had simply been welcomed as children. Nathan stepped closer to the wooden counter and spoke with sincere gratitude. "Miss Brooks, you have given my son something no royal guard or grand banquet could have provided." Emma looked at him with quiet confusion. Nathan continued softly, You reminded them that kindness offered freely is one of the greatest gifts any kingdom can receive. As those words settled into the warm silence, none of them noticed that several curious townspeople had begun gathering outside the bakery windows, whispering as they caught sight of the Alpha King standing inside the humble little shop where the missing Wolf Pup Princes had chosen to spend their happiest winter afternoons. News traveled through Blackthorn Keep faster than the winter wind. By the following morning, nearly every merchant in the marketplace had heard whispers that the Alpha King himself had visited Emma Brooks's tiny bakery. Some insisted she had performed an extraordinary favor for the royal family. Others claimed she had secretly known. 3 days later, the first light of dawn painted the snow-covered rooftops of Blackthorn Keep with soft shades of gold as something unusual began unfolding throughout the kingdom. Instead of preparing another formal winter gathering inside the Grand Palace, royal servants carefully loaded baskets of fresh fruit, warm tea, embroidered tablecloths, and simple wooden chairs onto wagons bound for the marketplace. Curious citizens stepped outside their homes to watch the unexpected procession pass by. No musicians marched at the front. No elaborate banners announced a royal celebration. The entire event seemed strangely modest, almost as though the palace itself had chosen humility over ceremony. Emma Brooks noticed the activity while arranging apple pies in her bakery window. She paused only briefly before returning to kneading dough, believing the royal preparations surely had nothing to do with her. Moments later, the familiar sound of cheerful laughter echoed from outside as the two Wolf Pup Princes hurried through the bakery door carrying small baskets filled with bright red apples they had insisted on helping collect from the royal orchard. "We brought more ingredients," the younger prince announced proudly. Emma smiled warmly. "Then we had better make enough pies for everyone." Soon the little bakery filled with comforting activity once again. The boys washed apples, measured cinnamon, and carefully rolled dough beneath Emma's patient guidance. Their crusts had improved since the first afternoon they had visited, although the younger prince still laughed whenever flour settled across his sleeves instead of the table. Outside, townspeople slowly gathered along the street, whispering as they realized members of the royal household continued arriving one by one. Bakers from neighboring shops carried extra bread. Farmers delivered baskets of winter vegetables. Even the elderly carpenter whose single slice of pie had often been his only luxury arrived carrying a handcrafted wooden serving table as a gift. None of it had been requested. Kindness simply inspired more kindness. Before long, Alpha King Nathan Ashford entered the bakery with his usual calm smile, greeting every person by name whenever he could. Rather than standing apart, he rolled up the sleeves of his dark coat and accepted an apron Emma quietly handed him. Several surprised neighbors watched as the ruler of the kingdom carefully helped place warm pies on his serving trays beside ordinary villagers. No one hurried him. No one treated the moment as a performance. It simply felt natural. As everyone gathered outside beneath the clear winter sky, Nathan stepped onto the small wooden porch beside the bakery. The marketplace gradually became silent. Men, women, and children looked toward their king, expecting a formal speech. Instead, Nathan turned first toward Emma. "Miss Brooks," he said gently, "you welcomed my sons before you knew who they were. You offered warmth before asking questions. You shared what little you had without expecting anything in return." Emma lowered her eyes modestly, clearly uncomfortable becoming the center of attention. Nathan continued, allowing every word to carry across the quiet square. "A kingdom grows stronger not only because of its walls or its crown, but because of people who choose compassion when no one is watching." He then looked toward the gathered citizens. "Many believe greatness begins inside a palace. I have learned that greatness may begin inside a humble bakery, where every loaf of bread and every apple pie reminds us that dignity belongs to every person." The crowd remained silent for only a heartbeat before warm applause filled the marketplace. The elderly carpenter smiled proudly. The young mother who had often received extra bread wiped away grateful tears. Merchants nodded respectfully toward Emma, seeing her not as a quiet omega living at the edge of the market, but as someone whose kindness had quietly strengthened an entire community long before anyone recognized it. The two young princes stood beside Emma with unmistakable pride shining across their faces. Without thinking, Each reached for one of her hands exactly as children would hold the hand of someone they trusted completely. Watching that simple gesture, Nathan understood that no royal decree could have earned the love his sons had freely given to the gentle baker. It had been won through patience, generosity, and countless ordinary moments that together became extraordinary. The winter gathering in the marketplace became a tradition almost overnight. Each Saturday morning, long before the church bells echoed across Blackthorn Keep, neighbors arrived carrying baskets of apples, flour, fresh cream, and honey from nearby farms. No invitations were necessary. People simply came because they wanted to help. Emma Brooks still unlocked her bakery before sunrise, tied on the same well-worn apron, and greeted every volunteer with the same gentle smile she had offered long before anyone knew her name beyond the neighborhood. Nothing about her kindness had changed. Only the number of people choosing to share it had grown. The two Wolf Pup Princes became the first to arrive nearly every week. They raced through the bakery door with cheerful excitement, eager to wash apples, knead dough, and carry warm bread to families who struggled through the long winter. Their laughter blended naturally with the comforting sounds of mixing bowls, crackling ovens, and friendly conversation. Children from every part of the kingdom soon joined them, learning that flour on their hands mattered far less than the joy of placing fresh bread into someone else's basket. Emma patiently guided each child, without favoring anyone because of family name or social standing. Every lesson began with the same quiet reminder. The secret ingredient is not cinnamon. It is caring about the person who will eat what you make. Those simple words spread from child to child until even adults found themselves repeating them. Alpha King Nathan Ashford visited often, although he never announced his arrival. Sometimes he carried sacks of flour over his shoulder. Other times he quietly repaired broken shelves or stacked firewood beside the bakery before anyone noticed he had come. The people gradually stopped seeing those moments as surprising. They simply accepted that their king preferred serving beside them rather than standing above them. Watching his sons laugh with ordinary village children brought him a quiet peace he rarely experienced inside the palace. They were growing into compassionate young leaders not because of royal lessons, but because of the example they witnessed every week inside Emma's warm kitchen. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, Nathan proposed an idea that reflected everything the little bakery had come to represent. An unused building beside the marketplace was carefully restored with bright windows, sturdy wooden tables, and a large stone oven. Above the entrance hung a simple hand-carved sign that read, "The Community Bakery." There were no royal crests decorating the walls, only shelves filled with flour, apples, bread, and recipes written in Emma's careful handwriting. Every child who wished to learn could walk through those doors without paying a single dollar. Orphans, apprentices, farmers' sons, merchants' daughters, and young wolves from every family baked together, shared meals together, and carried extra loaves to elderly neighbors who could no longer make the walk into town. Emma never considered herself the owner of the place. She simply welcomed each new face exactly as she had welcomed two hungry boys on a snowy afternoon. The younger prince proudly declared that his apple pies no longer leaned to one side, while his older brother quietly became the best bread maker in the class because he measured every ingredient with thoughtful patience. Nathan often watched from the doorway without interrupting, smiling as he realized that leadership could be taught through flour-covered hands just as easily as through royal ceremonies. The little bakery that had once struggled to remain open had become the warm heart of Blackthorn Keep, where strangers became neighbors and neighbors became family. Every loaf that left the ovens carried the same quiet message Emma had lived from the beginning. Real generosity never asked who deserved kindness before choosing to give it. Spring arrived gently over Blackthorn Keep, replacing the last traces of snow with fresh green fields, blooming apple trees, and warm sunlight that poured through the windows of the community bakery each morning. The laughter that once belonged to only two curious Wolf Pup Princes now filled every corner of the building as children from every background learned side by side, their hands dusted with flour and their hearts shaped by the simple lessons Emma Brooks quietly taught every day. Travelers passing through the kingdom often stopped to ask why so many smiling people gathered around such an ordinary bakery. The answer was always the same. It was never the bread alone that drew them there. It was the feeling that everyone who crossed the threshold belonged. Emma remained exactly as she had always been. She still rose before sunrise, still prepared apple pies with patient hands, still left baskets of fresh bread outside the door for anyone who needed them before the town awakened. She never asked to have her name carved into monuments or written into royal records. She believed that kindness did not become more valuable because people noticed it. It simply became stronger each time someone chose to pass it forward. The two young princes never forgot the winter afternoon when a gentle baker had welcomed them without asking for titles or expecting rewards. As they grew older, they carried that lesson into every part of their education. They listened before speaking, greeted every citizen with sincere respect, and often returned to the bakery to help teach younger children how to bake their very first apple pies. Whenever one of those children became discouraged by a cracked crust or uneven loaf, the older prince smiled and repeated the words Emma had once shared with him. Every baker starts somewhere. The younger prince would laugh and add, "The pie only has to be made with care." Those simple sentences became traditions passed from one generation to the next. Alpha King Nathan Ashford often stood quietly beneath the blooming apple trees outside the bakery, watching the life that flourished there. He understood now that the greatest decision he had made as a ruler was not a military victory or a royal decree. It had been recognizing the extraordinary value hidden inside an ordinary act of compassion. He had searched the kingdom for two missing princes, only to discover that they had found something far more precious than anyone expected. They had found an example worthy of a kingdom. One peaceful afternoon, Nathan walked into the bakery carrying no royal documents and wearing no ceremonial robes. He accepted a warm slice of apple pie from Emma and thanked her with the same genuine smile he had offered the day he first discovered his sons there. Looking around the room, he saw children laughing together, neighbors sharing meals, and families helping strangers as naturally as they once cared only for themselves. The quiet transformation reached far beyond the walls of the bakery. It had become part of the heart of Blackthorn Keep itself. Years later, visitors would still hear people tell the story of the gentle Omega baker who changed a kingdom without seeking power, wealth, or recognition. They would speak of two young princes who learned that true nobility begins with humility, and of an alpha king wise enough to recognize greatness where others saw only simplicity. But inside the bakery, none of those stories mattered as much as the next warm loaf leaving the oven or the next hungry neighbor walking through the door. Life continued with the same quiet rhythm that had started it all, proving that the smallest acts of kindness are often the ones that echo the longest, because love offered freely has a remarkable way of finding every heart willing to receive it. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What was your favorite moment, and what message or lesson did you take away from Emma and Nathan's journey? Share your opinion in the comments below and join the conversation with fellow story lovers. If you enjoyed this tale, please give the video a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Alpha's Regret Stories. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next exciting story filled with romance, drama, betrayal, and unforgettable twists. See you in the next story.